All right, grasshoppers, this better be a real important show here, Allie. I turned off my country music just so we could talk on air here. So how you doing?
I'm doing great, Tom. How are you?
Excellent. So everybody doesn't know, I think everybody should know Allie by now. And again, she's loved by all. So very informative. Allie is an epidemiologist. She's a lumberjack. She's a mother. She's a hockey coach. She runs a hockey program.
No. Definitely not a coach. I only barely know offsides, Tom.
Well,
I've played hockey for 10 years.
A lot of coaches have a hard time with offsides too. So how are things? Are you good with family?
Yeah, they're great. Thank you.
No sake being consumed lately, or?
Actually, no, I was just thinking it's time to get back to the sake because, when I was in Japan, like you can have one sake or you can have like 100 yen little bit. And like, that's it for the night, Right. When you drink out of a wine bottle, it's so easy to just keep pouring and pouring, I'm better with portion control. So.
Anything in life that is worth doing is worth overdoing.
That may be true, but then you have to not everyone can be as consistent as you, Tom. I have peaks and valleys. And then, when I'm a little off, I think to myself, Tom was up at 3:54 and look at that amazing sunrise. Allie, you just have to get out and go see that sunrise. So thank you for inspiring us.
Yeah. But it is for me now, if I've had a few too many cocktails the night before, it's like that's the challenge, like to really focus even harder, right? We talked about that lack of sleep and whatever.
I know you like to make things harder for yourself.
Yeah, sure.
We've talked about that hard head of yours before.
Isn't it true? I was talking to somebody the other day and they were trying to convince me to change something. And I go, listen, it's just not going to happen. It's just,
Right. I mean, I think the challenge is like a large ship. You just kind of nudge it a tiny bit. You're not going to do a huge course correction immediately.
It is funny though, because like intermittent fasting, for instance, people have told me about intermittent fasting for years. And it wasn't until I finally decided to do my own research and decide, this is a good thing to do. I just wouldn't listen to anybody else. I had to do my own research. So I guess it's a good thing in some ways that you don't get swayed into doing something you don't want to do.
No, I think it really is very good. And it touches on one of the things we were going to chat about today. You and I never actually plan these topics in advance. We should probably let your listeners know that literally 1 minute before we decide this is what we're talking about. But I like that natural conversation. And, your listeners get the real deal from you and from me because of that. It's not scripted. But sometimes that parent-child relationship, especially in the pandemic, is really hard because everyone's home. And not every teenager is going to be like a robot and 100% dialed in on work all the time and getting things done. And sometimes they'll be so engrossed in their own work that they actually stay up too late and then they're kind of having a rough time in the morning. And they try to cover their tracks by telling like a portion of the truth, but not the whole truth, right? Or just a version of the story, but not the whole story. And, good parents have a nose for that, right? Like I can always smell it. I know when it's happening. And then every now and then, like maybe half the time I'll go and actually do my data checking and gather my data and find that, yes, that suspicion checks out. I was 100% right. And so my son and I now have this thing where like, we're having a lovely day today because like I found out that I didn't get the full story. He owned up to it right away, which is so great. And now we're having a lovely day. So I was like, could we just like skip the whole part where you don't tell the whole story and just go straight to the lovely day? Would that be okay? Because
he doesn't lie to you necessarily. He just doesn't tell the whole story.
Right. He knows better than there's usually a flat out lie because I will be very direct, like, a bull in a china shop. I'm a very direct person. I'll be like, I know you were doing this. And then he'll actually try to deny it. And I actually know it happened. But not every lie is the same. In my opinion, I used to think that every lie was cut out of the same cloth and no lies were ever okay. I was going to die on that mountain. And I have come to learn, being now the mother of a teenage boy who's extremely patient and stubborn, that you can't really approach conversation that way because it's not going to go well. When you have someone who's as stubborn as me and twice as big and clever.
but let's back up a sec. So you don't think that all lies are the same. So just because somebody's lying to you, there's certain ways you're not then saying, well, then they're a liar. If they're lying.
Let me say this. All lies affect my trust. because I'm that kind of person. So if you lie to me and it's a big lie or a little lie, I'm going to put those lies in the same bucket. And I'm going to say, you know what, unfortunately, my trust is now impaired because of a lie. The existence of a lie suggests to me that there will be more lies and different kinds of lies and on bigger things. And so I don't like being on that path. However, when you're in a relationship with somebody, I think if you treat all lies the same, you close doors to communication. And I think that when you keep the bigger picture in mind, it's preserving the relationship with the person and their best interests at heart long term, because we're dealing with a young person who's still evolving, right? Then I think you need to modify the response. I used to not modify my response to lies when they were very young. And I just would, hit the roof. But that's just not productive.
So a young person, your child, whatever your age, tells you a lie. They're lying. You call them out on the lie. You're right. You don't necessarily then say, okay, my child is a liar. They lied about this certain situation.
No, I don't think so, because that defines them for the rest of their life. And that basically assumes there's no recovery. And what you're really trying to teach is you can modify your behavior. You can modify your choices. Even in the middle of lying, you can modify what you choose to say. There's always a path back. I think.
Yeah. Especially with your child, right? Because you're not going to end your relationship with your child, right? If you could have somebody, another stranger or whatever, or an acquaintance that lies to you and you go, listen, I just can't be around you anymore because I don't trust you anymore. You can't really do that with your child, right? In fact, your job is to raise that child and correct that behavior. If they're lying, it's your job to help them change that behavior, right?
I think so, but there's other challenging relationships that are shorter term, but still long and involved, like a teacher with a student, right? Or a counselor with a client. And in those cases too, it's challenging. I actually dug into why do people lie chronically a couple of years ago, because there was a child that I knew very well, and he always made up stories. And I was like, what? That bothers me when you feel like you need to just elaborate, they make these incredible stories that aren't true. What is driving that? And the research that I found that best explained it was coming out of a place of needing to validate and overcome insecurities. And so if the child expects you to not appreciate them, and they're going to work harder and harder and harder to create a narrative that does earn the respect and the appreciation. So the challenge, I think, is if you're in a long-term relationship with a student or family member, is really get at what is driving the lies. And if you can get to that and understand that and address the insecurities or the feelings of inadequacy, maybe they're worried that a 90% on a test isn't good. So I see this nice question here. Yeah. I call, I guess, hi, Barry. In my case with this young child, I felt like the exaggerations were so profound that it did border on lies. And I think that we should strive to be comfortable with the bald truth. Right, Tom? Bald truth.
I like that. That went over my head, though. Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
That's true, right?
I spend a lot of time overthinking things, so that's my best effort.
Because you've got me thinking now, because a young child doesn't know everything, what is right and wrong. That's experience growing up, and parents doing their job as good parents. And lying would go in that category too, right? I mean, it's like stealing a chocolate bar from a grocery store or whatever. If a child steals something from the grocery store, you're teaching a lesson. You take them back to the store, or get the owner of the store, and listen, I apologize, Mr. Whoever, and return the chocolate bar, right? So it's the same thing with the lie. You just don't paint the child as a liar. Correct it. Yeah.
I think that's true for so many things, Tom, like conversations with people are so important. And just talking about, this whole, I was listening to somebody this morning talking about the whole vaccine question, and the notion of informed consent was, I thought, such a nice way of approaching the decision to get a vaccine or not. And, we like to talk about overcoming vaccine hesitancy and convincing people to do things. And I just find that so repulsive, because I don't want to be beat over the head about anything. And the harder you beat me over the head, the more I'm going to think, you know what? No, this really isn't for me. Yeah. And the informed consent is a doctor-patient thing where you have this very personal conversation about the patient's situation and the options in front of them. And, usually all options have risks. And so it's up to the patient and the doctor to decide, okay, you've got this option A, doctor might recommend option A, maybe patient isn't comfortable. There's other options, wait and see, watch it, those also have risks too. But at the end of the day, it's weighing risks and then making a choice. So I just liked that approach a little bit better. And it, again, gets back to conversations with somebody in a relationship. That's important.
Right. So I've got a friend of mine, he's got a daughter, I think around 13 years old. And this woman is she's a single mother. She's got a fantastic relationship with her daughter. They're very close. But she heard her the other day making a comment to a friend, and I can't remember the exact quote, something, "Oh, I hate my mother," whatever. And it really, really crushed this woman. I felt like, teenage kids sometimes say things for certain effects to the friends or whatever. Is that accurate to say that?
I would say 100%. And, I think that we're all, I hate to use the pandemic to excuse things, because I think, like we've been in this for a year and like we can't really use it as an excuse anymore. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of underlying frustrations that no one has gotten relief from yet. Right. And just the fact that there's this underlying lack of normalcy is a challenge for people to overcome. And people are in more, in like getting back to the first part of our conversation, when we're all together more, we have a chance to really rub each other the wrong way more often than we would otherwise. Yeah. And I think the poor mom, I really feel for her. Mother-daughter relationships are challenging. Yeah. And, it's again, just getting back to that relationship. What can we do to repair it today? What can we do today to open conversation? So.
Right. So like that kind of comment, that's a hurtful comment. She knows, she understands her daughter's not trying to hurt her, but then, so you can't just, wash that away and say, well, it doesn't hurt. Of course it hurts. But now what do you do? Like, I guess as a parent, it's your job then to explain to her, like, that's a very hurtful comment. And, where's it coming from? Or how much do you get into that? Or do you just accept the fact that it's just a comment that somebody that's young made?
Well, I think a couple of things. In our house, like, we really say that word is a no-go. So that would be number one. But if that's not already the scenario, then, the poor mom, unfortunately, I think that it's incumbent on her to create, if she can, an environment where the daughter can explain what drove that comment. And if she can't do that, if it's way too painful for the mom to be able to, in a non-confrontational way, to just be like, I understand you're feeling this way. What is driving it? What can we do? Then get some help with that. There's all kinds of options for support and counseling through the web. It's possible to get some help with this. So I would just suggest reaching out, because that relationship is so important and it is challenging, and she's not alone. And I'm sure she hasn't done anything wrong. It's just the two people trying to work together. It's really tough.
Right. So I guess the bottom line, I mean, you're right. You really can't blame the pandemic, but in some ways, I mean, the fact that we're going at it so long makes it even worse, right? We're like, a lot of kids are still at home, homeschool. Yeah. Parents are working from home, together 24 hours a day. So it's, I mean, you're right. You can't just let things slide and get worse and worse. If you do need to go get help, it's important to reach out and get help from somebody, right? Yeah,
I think so, because let's just say we could flip the switch back to normal. I mean, probably the underlying challenges were still there. They're just, we're so busy and we're out away from the home that they don't hit a flashpoint quite as easily. But more than likely, there's still some things that are worth addressing before they continue. And, both people are in their like 40s and 60s now. Wouldn't it be better to get those taken care of now if you can? And the other thing I wanted to say is, there's a lot of frustrations that in social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, a lot of people like agitated over certain issues. And if, the adult is spending a lot of time frustrated about certain issues and watching message traffic on any of these social media platforms, and they really can't do much, they are powerless to affect change. That can cause the parent or the adult a lot of frustration. They have the best interests of the child at heart. There's nothing they can do to change certain policies. And it just really causes difficulty. Lack of agency as a human being is one of the things that frustrates people most and causes so much stress.
I love that topic. We should do like a full show on that someday too. I want to get off and talk about the pandemic a little bit and the vaccine. We touched on it before we got on the show. How are we doing with the rollout of the vaccine? Is that on schedule, the way it's supposed to be going, or?
Yeah, I think it's going well. I was looking at, there's a website that's really fabulous if you want to dig into this and play with graphs and make your own graphs and compare different things. It's called ourworldindata.org, and it draws all the underlying data on vaccines and cases from official sources, but it puts it together in a very user-friendly, interactive way. So ourworldindata.org. And I was looking at the rollout, and the UK has prioritized, United Kingdom has prioritized first dose for more people, whereas we're really pushing 2 doses. So the first dose coverage is a little better in the UK, but we have, I believe it's the last I saw, first dose was up to 46%, at least 1 dose. And that was in Maine, I think, was leading, and like at least 30%. So between 30 and 46% coverage with at least 1 dose of vaccine.
That's right.
Sorry, you cut out for just a second.
Why is it 2 doses?
It's 2 doses for the 2 of the 3 vaccines that are given emergency use authorization here in this country, and then 1 dose for the one that's been paused, Janssen.
Right.
So it's 2 doses because they want to be sure that you've got a full and robust immune response. But that first dose gives, it looks like in the real world, now that we have 182 million doses of it administered in the US, it looks like around 80% effectiveness in the real world. But some people don't seroconvert with the first dose, and then they need 1 more dose of exposure. I would say that's pretty rare, and I don't know the fraction, but that's true in most vaccines where it might take 2 doses.
Hey, nerd. What is zero confirm? What is like?
Oh, seroconvert. Seroconvert means you flip the little switch in your body, and now you have antibodies detectable.
Oh, okay.
So you go to a lab and you get your blood drawn. I did this a little while ago. It was super cool. But you have to remember, like, lab detection is at a certain level. So you might have them. It's just they can't detect them.
Gotcha. So anybody knows I called Ellie a nerd there, but that's as a friendly nerd. She has,
yes.
She likes.
Oh, it's a great compliment.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's true. I would not call the Allie names. It was it was a compliment to Allie.
You can't make me turn red anymore. I used to say, here's a secret, redheads, right? Redheads turn bright red when they're embarrassed. So in school all the time, I would always ask questions, so curious, but every time I asked a question, I turned bright red. And kids would call me like Molly Glowworm instead of Molly Ringwald. And so I finally learned, if I sit in the front row, then no one can see me turning red except the teacher.
Oh, very good. That's a good one.
Genius.
Like very good. Yeah. Excellent. All right. So, with 2 doses. So I have a buddy of mine, and I was going to say, I don't want to scare people away. It seems like the people that get effects from the vaccine are like kind of knocked out for a couple of days. That's more for the second vaccine, correct?
Well, 2 things on that. I think one, there's something in my work, epidemiology, that we call, and there's many kinds of biases, but the one that you're bringing to mind is called detection bias. And so the things that are most notable to a person are the things they're going to talk about. So somebody might go and you might hear about it, right? So I think, half of all people in the clinical trials had, or close to half, had fatigue, and half didn't. But we hear more about the fatigue, we hear more about the muscle aches, we hear more about the fevers, but that's less than half. That's between like 30-40% of people. So you've got 60% of people who really aren't feeling anything. We just tend not to hear about them as much. So I think it's really important when people get vaccinated, they go to VSafe, which is at the CDC. It's a simple enrollment with your cell phone number. And every day after vaccination, they ping you and say, how are you feeling? Are you feeling any of these things? And the more data that we get, the better information we have on reactions in the real world. We have data from the clinical trials on 20,000 people in each arm. And so like 70,000 people across all 3 vaccines. But in the real world, 182 million people, that's powerful. So VSafe is something we're not talking about enough. And it's really awesome that the CDC is making it so easy for people to report how they're feeling. Usually it's like you have a bad, reaction. You've got to call your doctor. Doctor evaluates you, then doctor enters it into vaccine adverse event reporting system, VAERS. Patients can enter it as well, and more people have heard about it because of the vaccines. But I think it's a little bit more cumbersome to have to go and find that versus just being pinged every day for the symptoms.
Right.
So I got my first dose yesterday.
Right. So I rarely have a friend of mine out in Canada, in Calgary, and he got really sick after his first shot. Like, I say really sick. I mean, that the knocked out kind of symptoms that people get from the second shot. Is that the reason for that?
It happens. The 2 doses for Pfizer looked to me in the clinical trials. Again, this is 20,000 to 20,000 people comparing vaccine to placebo. So it's nothing like the 182 million now. But it looked to me like dose 1 and dose 2 were roughly comparable. Whereas Moderna had a little bit more muscle aches in the second dose compared to the first dose. So I think that might be why people notice such a difference, like not have been so much, not so noteworthy, but in comparison to second dose, they had a bit more reaction, but it's simply evidence of your immune system responding. And, just like in natural disease, immune systems are going to respond differently to the virus itself, as well as the vaccine.
Right.
So not everybody's response will be the same. And even time over time, dose 1 versus dose 2 may not be comparable.
They paused the rollout of the Johnson vaccine, correct?
Right. They paused that until April 23rd. They're going to look at it again because they're very interested in, is it really women 18 to 48 who are having this very unusual blood clot with thrombocytopenia? So they're taking a close look at the data. They want to capture all of the people who might have this happen. So they paused the vaccine, but then they had to wait 13 days for the people who are recently vaccinated to be picked up if there were more of them beyond the 6.
So the conspiracy theorists will tell us that there was like 7 million of those Johnson & Johnson shots that have been given out, and only 6 people suffered from the blood clots. So that's such a small percentage. They don't really believe it's because of the blood clots. They believe that there's more of a financial or political reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who want to, I guess, people can use data to justify their opinions, whether it's pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, right? And I'm not really obviously a fan of either. I think that straight up the middle and honest reporting is absolutely critical to building trust and confidence. Right. And so, initially some people were annoyed that the pause was happening because they felt that would be putting gasoline on the fire of the anti-vaxxers. I say, I don't care. If we need to take a closer look at this, then that's the right thing to do. We have other vaccines for people who really need a vaccine because their risk profile for natural disease is so terrible. There's other vaccines they can get. Pause the one that we're worried about, take a good look at it, and reinforce the fact that our post-marketing surveillance system actually works, and turn it back on for the right people if it's appropriate to do so. It was absolutely the right call. But I remember feeling like I was in the minority thinking that, and now I'm seeing more coming out. It's just unfortunate that the middle of the road opinion isn't the one that gets the attention initially. It's like it takes a while for that to be okay.
And they're not saying, people are saying, well, it's 6 out of 7 million. But they're not saying we're done with the vaccine. We're saying we just need to pause for a second here, do a study, and then we're at, right? What
they want to do is confirm the numerator and the denominator. I know we talked about fractions last time and the real importance of that. The denominator is so critical, so that they need to figure out, okay, who is this happening with? How many really are there? And then we can figure out the incidence of that severe outcome compared to baseline in the population. And the truth is, vaccines do have severe side effects, very rarely, but they are there. And so does natural disease. So it's a complex matrix. Getting back to that whole conversation about informed consent between a doctor and a patient, it's incumbent on all of us to do informed consent with ourselves and really weigh the risks in front of us. And this is what I personally labored with regarding getting a vaccine myself. I actually spent a lot of time thinking about it and made an appointment. Got the vaccine yesterday, but up until the moment that the needle was going to go in, I was thinking, I could walk out any second. Yeah. I give myself that option. If I feel like I have a question that's not answered properly yet to my satisfaction, then I'm just going to go and reschedule. Sure. So I completely appreciate people who have questions.
Yeah, totally. And you're right. It's good to ask the questions too. So is there an acceptable, this is probably a tough question, is there an acceptable number of deaths or illnesses from a vaccine that so in this case, that can clearly save a lot of lives, but if it creates other illnesses or deaths, the vaccine, in this case, it was a small number. In science, is there an acceptable number?
That's a tough question to answer because, even treatments have risks. And that's one of the challenges with, even the monoclonal antibodies, which have been shown to be so effective in treating disease in the first 10 days. Anything you do has risks, right? So me as a human being, just me being a mom and a human being, is one death acceptable? No, especially if it happened to be me and I was fine before I walked into the pharmacy, fine before I got the shot, and then 6 days later I have a terrible blood clot. Is that fine? No. I mean, so, on a grand scale, as far as preventing infection and death among vulnerable people throughout the world, do we need to devise the safest possible vaccines and therapeutics? Yes, we do. Will that inherently have some risk? Yes. And that's why each human being should be given the privilege of making a choice, knowing full well what the risks might be. And that's why this pause is important.
Right.
Because we'll be able to say, you know, for women, for younger women, perhaps, if it ends up being younger women are more at risk, they will then know, you know, but like everything has risk. I went and got a CT with contrast for an injury. I don't think I've told you this yet, Tom. I actually wrecked my ACL launching a pumpkin on a catapult over Thanksgiving a couple years ago. No drinking involved.
That story doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't surprise me.
Well, I blew out my ACL. I've like lots of years of horseback riding and sports and running, and I blow out my ACL doing that. I think I have one like thread of it, but you know, the CT with contrast to go check out my ACL had like tremendous risk. I remember reading at the bottom of the informed consent. I was like, seriously? I don't know if it was 1 in 80,000 or 1 in 800,000. I think it was like 1 in 80,000. There was some risk that actually made me call my husband to be like, I cannot believe this. Right. Really? And he's like, it's fine. You know, I went ahead because I was on the
too, like you think about it. I lost my mother to cancer like 23 years ago, and she went through the long battle with chemotherapy and everything. And I know they had to try and fight it, but the chemo not almost, I think made it even worse, you know, than the cancer did. But again, you have to try. I mean, if that's a treatment that could potentially save her life, you have to try it. But again, it runs the risk of causing a lot of damage too, right? Right. Yeah, it's this life thing that we're doing. It's pretty tough, honestly. I say that as with a wry smile, but I mean, unfortunately, nothing is safe necessarily. And we've gotten into a mindset where I think we're all having a little bit of difficulty framing risks because we've been told to stay home. And if you stay home and you're not going anywhere, you're not flying anywhere, you're not driving anywhere, your life does become suddenly extremely safe compared to what it was. I mean, your lifetime risk of getting into a car accident and dying is 1 in 107. It's actually very common. And pedestrian accident is 1 in 543 lifetime risk of dying in a pedestrian accident. So all those times I'm out jogging and I see a car coming towards me, I'm like, oh, I better jump out of the road. So don't get me started on deaths from car accidents. So I looked up the numbers, and there's, I think, approximately 10,000 deaths every year from speed-related accidents in the United States. But then I say to myself, why do we sell cars that go over the speed limit then? Wouldn't that, if you couldn't speed, wouldn't that save 10,000 lives based on those numbers? Yeah, I just think I mean, we all want to save lives, and there's 10,000 lives you save right now by not making cars that go over the speed limit.
I mean, that gets to free will, right? And choices.
Well, yeah, but it's not a right to drive a car. I mean, it's a privilege to drive a car. You have to get a license to drive a car, and you have to follow the rules of the road. So, yeah. But meanwhile, I drive on the highway at 80 miles an hour. So,
yeah. You know what I don't understand about myself is I came back from Japan and I drive slow. So I don't know if I have not figured out the conversion between kilometers per hour and miles per hour, or if Americans just drive really fast. I haven't figured that out.
I think it's Americans drive fast, and I'm one of them too. And I get in some bad habits on the highway where I'm in no hurry to go someplace, but I feel the need to beat everybody else on the highway. It's like a race. I have to. And I get home and I'm going, Tom, what are you doing? It was too stupid. But I seem to, here it is too. I'll do it on the highway and it's okay. But then when I get into a residential street, especially going through a school zone that says 20 miles an hour, I have to go 20 miles an hour. And if anybody's speeding to the school zone, then I'm irate about it. But in the meantime, I can go 80 miles an hour on the highway, right? So it's
well, it's good that you're looking out for the kids, Tom. That's nice. Plus, you're well known in your neighborhood, no doubt.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'm so sorry, Tom. I wanted to correct one thing from last week. Often we get talking so fast and I don't really complete a thought. You asked me about masks and masks below the nose versus fully covering the nose, and what were my thoughts on that? I was like, well, it's a start. You aerosolize a lot when you're talking. What I didn't talk about is, do masks protect the person, the wearer, very well if they're only here and not on the nose? And the truth is you can get infected quite easily through your nose. That's where the virus takes up roost first. So if you're concerned about preventing infection for yourself, then definitely it needs to go over the nose. And there's some that have like a wire that you can create a little bit better fit up there.
Right. I was at friends, was it last week, and I got in an elevator, and the little guy in the elevator didn't have any mask on. And in fact, a couple of people came to get in the elevator, saw him with no mask, and didn't get on the elevator. They had the mask on. So I asked him, I was very polite. I said, don't you have a mask? And he said, no, I don't have one. He says, plus I had the vaccine already. And I said, well, the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting the virus. It just helps you fight the virus if you get it. You can still spread it to other people. Am I correct in saying that that's the right way?
You are correct, but it's a complicated thing because, like, technically you're correct, and that's the big question that they're really interested in. The mRNA vaccines have 95 and 94% efficacy, Pfizer and Moderna, against even developing symptoms. And more research is suggesting that if you have a low viral load, you're less likely to have symptoms, you're less likely to transmit. And they're really looking into whether or not you actually do transmit very often. And it's not common. I can't give you a percent, but next week I'll come back and try to get you the best study, the best, most recent study on this. But the original conjecture and the hope was that by reducing viral load, by reducing symptoms, we're going to be very unlikely to transmit if we've been fully vaccinated. But I was thinking about this before we talked. The more people get vaccinated in this country, and in Israel, it's 56% 2 doses, 62% 1 dose. And, we are vaccinating millions and millions, 3 to 4 million people a day. We're going to get to a point where we have enough people fully vaccinated that we can start to go back to normal. And so that's going to be the thing to retrain people's minds and policymakers' minds about when and how is it okay to just get on an elevator with no mask and have people not be worried. So it's actually a really important question. And for those who remain unvaccinated, either because they can't get vaccinated or they're immunocompromised and the concern is they're not going to fully respond to the vaccine, or by choice, it's going to be interesting. Those who are remaining unvaccinated by choice will be protected by the people around them who've gotten vaccinated. That's the whole point of herd or population immunity. But there's still going to be some risk, right? I mean, if you're walking around with no mask, you're going to pick up, rhinovirus, adenovirus, some other cold virus, influenza. So I think it's just worth thinking about. For me, I'd rather uncomplicate my life. That's part of why I chose to get at least 1 dose, even though I've had COVID, is because I'm going to appreciate, as we go back towards normal and everyone else is taking masks off, I'm going to appreciate having the opportunity to do the same thing and be able to take the mask off with some confidence. Versus being like,
I think you get to the point that the people that have not been vaccinated are kind of restricted from the activities like going to sporting events and that kind of stuff.
It's a super complicated question, and I don't really know how that's going to evolve. We haven't done that with other vaccines, except for international travel when certain travel vaccines are recommended. And that's for the person's own protection, because if you're going to a place where certain conditions are endemic and you may not have immediate access to healthcare, you kind of want to have a vaccine on board before you go and put yourself in that risk situation. But here, I mean, we don't ask people what your measles vaccination status is before you go to a baseball game. So, I mean, that's an odd example probably, but it's the one that comes to mind. So I don't know. I mean, I would probably want to spend some time thinking about it from a philosophical standpoint, and there's other people far better prepared to do that than I am. But
no, not true. No, you're far better prepared.
No, it's complicated to think about. I hate to restrict individual liberties. I strongly believe in individual choice and fully informed consent and being able to weigh risks and being able to walk away at any point. I mean, even yesterday, like when I was getting the vaccine and our son came with me, I wanted him to read the full 8 pages himself and feel like he had the opportunity to leave that pharmacy without getting the vaccine if he wanted to. Even though he's 16 and I can still say, I'd like you to do this. I mean, he deserves the right to choose whether or not he thinks that the risks and benefits that I've laid out for him make some sense. And I think every individual deserves that. And if we're not doing a good job providing information to them, then it's incumbent on people who understand kind of what's available to point out good resources, good studies, point out the flaws in the studies and try to answer.
Right. And you know what? It's fine because I've heard a couple of, actually a friend of mine, and I won't mention his name, but he's on the radio a lot. And he does an advertisement for the vaccine and says it's totally safe. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're really not being totally honest because, like you said before, there is always risk to it. So it's almost like you don't believe him now because he's really not, and he's not intentionally not telling the truth. He just wants to encourage people to get it. But by doing that, I'm thinking, you're really not telling, But
yeah, I know it's hard. People want some clarity, right? And people, so, I will say this for me. I am comfortable saying for me that at the end of the day, I chose to get vaccinated because I wanted a bit more boost. I wasn't sure what the natural disease COVID itself brings in 25 proteins into it brings in a genome of 10 genes that makes around 25 proteins, okay? Spike being only one of them. So it made other stuff while it was in me, right? It infected my cells and created billions of its virus particle, and then those billions of virus particles went into other cells and they created more of these proteins, and I'm not sure what all of them do. So the vaccine is one protein. And I kind of like the idea that my body is getting a boost. And so if it sees COVID again, I might be able to attack it even more quickly before it has a chance to infect my cells and produce more of these other proteins with their unknown jobs. It's not fully true that they're unknown. There are people who study coronaviruses and they could say what some of the others do, but I don't think that we fully understand 100% of what all 25 proteins do.
See, and that's better with people who don't understand. It's just not possible at this point to understand everything, right? It's not possible for it to be. I'd rather somebody tell me, listen, the vaccine isn't totally risk-free, but here's when you got to check out, realize what your risk factor is, what's your age, what's your health, all those different kinds of things. Well, we're going to leave you on this. We're going back to the country music. Woo!
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's time for you to break your fast and go eat.
Yes, it is too. All right, Allie, great to see you again. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Grasshoppers. Send the good questions.